Remember those farmer sandwiches that used to fill lunch pails and kitchen tables alike? Stacked with simple ingredients and packed with flavor, they were made to fuel long days in the fields. These 30 forgotten sandwiches have faded into history, but it's time to bring them back, one bite at a time. Lard and onion slab wedge. It hits you first with the smell, that unmistakable scent of rendered lard, warm and faintly smoky, with a hint of something primal that clings to butcher paper like old stories cling to memory. You open the parcel and there it is, a slab of coarse country bread, smeared thick with snow-white lard, and topped with raw onion, sliced bold and unapologetic. No dressing, no garnish, just honesty between two crusts. The first bite is a wake-up call. The lard, smooth and velvety, melts into the crumb, coating the mouth in richness. Then the onion cuts through, sharp, pungent, astringent, a cleansing bite that somehow balances the fat. Salt brings the whole thing together, and if you're lucky, there's a faint whisper of pepper or vinegar for heat and tang. It's bold, it's crude, it's beautiful. This sandwich was never born to impress. It was born from hunger. During the Great Depression, when butter vanished from ice boxes and meat hung far out of reach, lard became a culinary lifeline. Rendered at home from backyard hogs or traded for at the butcher, it was shelf-stable, calorie-rich, and cost next to nothing. Onions, tough and stubborn as the folks who grew them, kept well in cellars and offered vitamins when most meals were shades of beige. Together, these two ingredients did more than feed, they sustained. Making one today is almost too easy. Start with a good, thick slice of rustic bread, rye pumpernickel, or a farmhouse wheat with enough chew to stand up to the lard. Spread on a hearty layer of lard, preferably homemade or at least unhydrogenated, with a scent that whispers of crackling skin and slow Sunday roasts. Top with thinly sliced yellow or red onion, overlapped like shingles. Season generously with coarse salt and cracked pepper. Some folks added a drizzle of vinegar, especially if the lard was particularly rich. Eat it folded over, open-faced or stacked, there's no wrong way. What matters is the respect. For the ingredients, for the hands that made do with so little, and for the resilience baked into every crumb. This isn't just a sandwich, it's a tribute to the hunger, grit, and quiet triumph of a generation. Pickled beet and egg sandwich. This one came out of the cellar, purple-stained, vinegar-sweet, and full of old-world pride. Open a jar of pickled beets and boiled eggs and you're already halfway there. These weren't just leftovers, they were little miracles of preservation. Sweet, tangy, a touch earthy, the pickled beet and egg sandwich was a staple in Pennsylvania Dutch kitchens, where thrift and flavor went hand in hand and nothing was wasted. Not time, not food, not effort. You can almost picture it laid out on a worn wooden table. A violet egg, its firm white, now blushed with beet juice, sliced thin and laid across a piece of dark rye or dense homemade wheat bread. Next come the beets, soft and slippery, their bright sweetness mellowed by vinegar and sugar, cut into rounds or thick shreds depending on who was doing the slicing. As they're layered on, they stain the bread a deep, luxurious magenta. Your fingers pick up the color too, a kind of edible ink that marks your participation in something old and satisfying. This sandwich wasn't about indulgence, it was about using what was on hand. Eggs were boiled in big batches at the start of the week, while beets, harvested in late summer, were pickled by the jarful in a spiced brine of white vinegar, sugar, cloves, mustard seed, and sometimes a bay leaf or sliver of horseradish. After a couple of days soaking together, the eggs took on a pink glow and a bright, tangy flavor. Come a busy midweek, when there wasn't time to light the stove, those jars came out and lunch was assembled cold, quick, and flavorful. To make one, begin by hard-boiling your eggs and peeling them. Submerge them in a brine made from beet juice, white vinegar, sugar, salt, and warm spices. Let the mixture sit in the fridge for 2 or 3 days. When ready, slice the eggs and beets and lay them over a slice of hearty bread. Add mustard or horseradish if desired, and top with another slice. It's a sandwich made of patience, planning, and deep-rooted tradition. One bite and you're tasting more than food. You're tasting a legacy that stains the fingers and lingers on the heart. Salt pork and molasses biscuit witch. It was hot, sticky, and strong enough to power a person through a full day's labor, sun up to sundown. The salt pork and molasses biscuit witch was a southern staple, born from smokehouses and cane mills, passed down through grease-stained aprons and handed off in calloused hands wrapped in cloth. It wasn't meant to be fancy. It was meant to last. Salt pork, the cousin of bacon but saltier and fattier, was cut in thick slabs and fried until golden at the edges and soft in the middle. It wasn't always tender, but it was always flavorful. The kind of meat that reminded you where it came from, cured with care, hung for weeks, and sliced with the kind of precision born from experience. When it hit the skillet, it sizzled and popped, releasing a rich aroma that drew sleepy-eyed farmhands out of bed quicker than any alarm. Then came the biscuits, baked fresh if possible, though yesterday's would do in a pinch. Thick and flaky, split down the middle and still warm enough to melt whatever touched them. Into that biscuit went the fried salt pork, and then the finishing touch, a drizzle of molasses, dark and sticky, poured from a jug that sat by the stove all year round. That sweetness soaked into the biscuit and tangled with the pork in a way that was downright spiritual. The flavor was rich, salty, and sweet, like breakfast and lunch and a memory all at once. Some folks might raise an eyebrow at the pairing, but in the South, that combination of pork and molasses is near gospel. To make it, fry slices of salt pork in a hot, dry skillet until crisp on the outside but still pliable inside. Slice a hot biscuit in half and lay in the pork while it's still sizzling. Drizzle with a spoonful of molasses. Blackstrap if you like it bitter, light if you prefer it sweet. Close the biscuit and press gently. It's a mouthful of contrast, crisp and soft, sweet and salty, old and eternal. A sandwich built for the long haul, made from smoke, syrup, and the steady rhythm of rural life. Cold-fried cornmeal mush sandwich. It was yesterday's breakfast turned into today's lunch. Unapologetically plain, stubbornly filling, and deeply rooted in Depression-era kitchens where no scrap of food was ever taken for granted. The cold-fried cornmeal mush sandwich didn't shine, but it didn't need to. It was the quiet workhorse of the lunchbox, packed in wax paper and eaten with weathered hands during a break between fence mending and field tilling. Cornmeal mush was as basic as it came. Water, salt, and yellow cornmeal stirred into a bubbling pot until thick as glue. Served hot, it was a bowl of comfort, often with a pat of butter or a splash of milk. But it was the leftovers, poured into a loaf pan and left to firm up overnight, that earned a second life in the skillet and eventually between slices of bread. Once chilled, the mush could be sliced clean, each piece dense and pale gold, ready to take on new texture in a hot pan. Fried in bacon fat or lard until the outside turned crisp and golden, it developed a toothsome crust while the center stayed soft and creamy. That contrast, crispy edge, tender core, was what made it sing. Layered between slices of hearty bread, it became a sandwich with real substance. No meat, no mayo, no frills. Sometimes it was eaten plain, other times with a drizzle of sorghum or a dusting of salt and pepper. The lucky ones might spread a bit of leftover bacon grease on the bread or tuck in a scrap of meat. But even without adornment, it filled the stomach and stuck with you. To make it, boil 4 cups of water with a teaspoon of salt. Whisk in a cup of cornmeal slowly to avoid lumps. Reduce the heat and stir until thick. Pour into a greased loaf pan and chill overnight. Slice into half-inch pieces and fry on both sides until golden. Place between 2 slices of soft white or whole wheat bread. Add syrup, butter, or eat it straight. It's simple, it's solid. It's survival in sandwich form. A reminder of how little it takes to feed a body when flavor is born from patience and practicality. Scalded milk gravy sandwich. This sandwich came from a time when even flour and milk were precious, and every meal had to count. The scalded milk gravy sandwich wasn't showy or stuffed with meat. It was soft, humble, and made from the kind of simple ingredients that lived in every farmhouse pantry. It was a warm, peppery hug of a sandwich, served hot when there was time, or packed cold for the midday meal when there wasn't. Scalded milk gravy started with a spoonful of fat, bacon grease, sausage drippings, or a pat of butter if you had it, heated in a skillet until bubbling. Flour was added, stirred into a roux, then slowly thinned with warm milk. The trick was to scald the milk first, heating it just to the edge of boiling so it thickened quicker and brought out a rich, almost nutty flavor. Once it bubbled and thickened to the consistency of pudding, it was seasoned with salt and cracked black pepper, lots of pepper, That was the signature. A speckled, creamy gravy so simple, it felt like a miracle. Hot, it was ladled over fresh biscuits or poured on cornbread. Cold, it was spooned into sandwiches. Thick, almost spreadable like a savory custard tucked between slices of soft white bread. It held together well and softened the bread over time, creating a sandwich that only got better as it sat wrapped in wax paper, waiting for a break in the day's labor. To make it, start by melting 2 tablespoons of bacon grease in a skillet. Add 2 tablespoons of flour and stir until just beginning to brown. Slowly whisk in 2 cups of warm milk, scalded if you want to do it right. Keep stirring until it thickens. Add a teaspoon of salt and a heavy pinch of black pepper. Let it cool slightly before spreading generously on soft sandwich bread. Fold the slice or top it with another, press gently, and let it rest. Hot or cold, it delivers comfort in every bite. It's not fancy, it's not loud, but it's built from the kind of resourcefulness that held farm kitchens together. And that's flavor money still can't buy. Apple butter and cottage cheese breadwich. Sweet met tangy on this quiet little sandwich, and together they told a story of resourceful comfort. The apple butter and cottage cheese breadwich was a common sight on farmhouse tables, especially in the Appalachian hills and scattered homesteads of the Midwest. It was simple, sweet, and cooling. Ideal for hot afternoons when the stove was cold and the air buzzed with flies and sunlight. Apple butter, thick as molasses and dark as barnwood, was the jewel of autumn. Cooked down slow in copper kettles with cinnamon, cloves, and a little cider, it was stored in glass jars or crocks and tucked away in pantries for the long winter ahead. It had depth. More than jam, less sugar than jelly, like the heart of the apple captured in a spoonful of spiced memory. Cottage cheese was the workhorse of the dairy world. Made from clabbered milk or buttermilk left to separate and drain, it came out soft, white, and a little lumpy with a flavor that leaned toward tangy cream. When made fresh, it was eaten still warm from the cloth it drained in. When chilled, it became the base for sandwiches, mixed with herbs or fruit, or in this case, paired with sweet apple butter for a cool midday bite. To build it, start with a slice of country bread, oatmeal, rye, or soft wheat. Spread a thick layer of apple butter on one side. Then gently spoon on fresh cottage cheese, enough to cover but not overwhelm. The curds will press into the apple butter, mixing at the edges. Add a pinch of salt if the cheese is too mild, or a dash of cinnamon if you like it sweeter. Top with a second slice of bread, or leave it open-faced. The result is creamy, spiced, and softly sour, each bite mellowing the last. It's not a loud sandwich, but it lingers. It tastes like quiet morning, summer air, and the kind of kitchen that always had something good tucked in the cupboard. It was cheap, easy, and made with what was already on hand. But for those who knew it, this sandwich was never second best. Mustard greens and crackling cornbread stack? This wasn't a sandwich that followed rules. It didn't need meat, mayo, or even sliced bread. The mustard greens and crackling cornbread stack was a Southern invention, born from what was left after supper and made new again the next morning. It was crumbly, spicy, and full of that earthy, smoky depth that only a pot of greens and a hot skillet can deliver. Mustard greens, picked young and cooked long, were a staple in gardens from Alabama to Appalachia. Boiled down with a bit of salt pork or ham hock, they softened into something dark, tender, and full of flavor. Their peppery bite mellowed as they cooked, but still had an edge, especially when hit with a splash of vinegar or pepper sauce just before serving. If there were any leftovers, and there often were, they were pressed, drained, and ready for sandwich duty. Crackling cornbread was its own prize. Made with coarse cornmeal and folded with crispy bits of pork skin, or cracklings, it was hearty, rustic, and just greasy enough to keep your hands shiny. Baked in a cast iron skillet until the edges were brown and the middle dense, it could hold up to anything, even a mess of greens. To make the sandwich, slice or break off 2 thick pieces of cold, crackling cornbread. Press out any remaining liquid from the greens, too much moisture would make the bread fall apart, and layer them on generously. Some folks added a dab of hot sauce, a slice of onion, or even a thin smear of bacon grease on the bread for extra richness. Stack the cornbread pieces, wrap it in paper or cloth, and it's ready to travel. The result is crumbly, juicy, and layered with deep, smoky flavor. It's not neat, it's not refined, but it is a bite of pure Southern ingenuity. This sandwich didn't need the spotlight. It was made in quiet kitchens and eaten on back steps or under trees. It was what you made when you had more cornbread than sense. And it was good every single time. Chow Chow and fatback sandwich. This was the kind of sandwich that hollered before you even bit into it. Spicy, greasy, vinegary, and bold. The Chow Chow and fatback sandwich came from southern pantries where pickling was an art form and from cast iron skillets that never got a chance to cool down. It was rough around the edges, loud in flavor, and unforgettable in all the right ways. Fatback was a staple in kitchens that made the most of every part of the hog. Cut from the back of the pig, it was thick with fat and little meat, heavily salted, sometimes smoked, and perfect for frying. Slices hit the skillet with a snap, curling at the edges and rendering down into golden, crisp sheets that shattered in your teeth like pork glass. It was salty. It was intense. And it needed something sharp to balance it. That's where the Chow Chow came in. A chunky, vinegary relish made from green tomatoes, cabbage, onions, and peppers, all chopped fine and cooked down with mustard seed, sugar, and cider vinegar. It was bright, tangy, and sweet hot. A flavor bomb meant to cut through fat and elevate everything it touched. Together, fatback and Chow Chow made a sandwich that was more about balance than subtlety. A couple of slices of white bread, soft enough to absorb some of the grease but sturdy enough not to fall apart, framed the chaos inside. The fatback went down first, still hot and snapping. Then a spoonful or two of Chow Chow, spread over top, soaking into the bread and softening the crunch just enough. There were variations, of course. Some added a slice of tomato, others a swipe of mayonnaise or a drizzle of hot sauce. But the classic version didn't need it. It was already more than enough. To eat it was to taste the South in full voice, preserved gardens, cured pork, and the kind of culinary creativity that comes from making do and making it sing. It was messy, it was strong, and it left a little trail of grease and vinegar down your hand, a mark of honor, not accident. Cold potato sandwich. This sandwich didn't have a voice, it had a whisper. Quiet, plain, and surprisingly satisfying, the cold potato sandwich was a staple on farms where yesterday's supper never went to waste and where simplicity was more than a virtue. It was survival. It didn't rely on spice, meat, or salt. It relied on the comfort of familiarity and the way a good boiled potato can hold its own between slices of bread. The potatoes were usually left over from dinner, boiled in salted water until fork tender, then cooled overnight in their skins. Peeled and sliced thin the next morning, they were soft, mild, and slightly creamy, like nature's butter spread across a blank canvas. Often, that canvas was a couple of slices of white bread or whatever loaf was lying on the counter, still soft from yesterday's baking. Seasoning was spare but thoughtful. A shake of salt, a grind of black pepper, maybe a pinch of paprika, or a few flakes of dried parsley. If someone had splurged, there might be a thin smear of mayonnaise or bacon grease on the bread, but more often it was dry and honest. Some households added raw onion for bite or a drizzle of vinegar to wake things up. Others kept it stripped down to its essence: potato, salt, bread, done. To make one, take a couple of cold boiled potatoes. Yukon Gold or red-skinned work best for their texture. Slice them into thin rounds. Lay the slices evenly across one slice of bread, overlapping slightly. Season with salt and pepper. Add any extras, onion, mayo, vinegar, if you feel fancy. Top with another slice of bread and press gently. There's no crunch, no heat, no spice, just soft layers, each bite a mellow, earthy mouthful that fills your belly and reminds you that nourishment doesn't need flash. It's the sandwich equivalent of a quiet nod from across the table. Unspoken understanding, steady and sure. This was the food of early mornings, long days, and short supplies. It never asked for attention, but it earned respect all the same. Dandelion leaf and butter sandwich. This was a sandwich pulled from the soil, not the store. The dandelion leaf and butter sandwich spoke of spring's first promise, when gardens were still just dirt and the only greens came from the edges of the pasture or the cracks in the fence line. It was wild food, gathered by hand, rinsed in cold water, and laid gently across slices of bread spread with fresh, salted butter. Simple, bitter, beautiful. The dandelion leaf is not a shy green. Young and tender in early spring, it carries a natural bite, peppery and a little sharp, like arugula's scrappy cousin. For country folks, especially those with an eye on the field and a mind on the grocery bill. These leaves were free for the taking. They were foraged, not farmed, gathered before they grew tough or flowered, often with dirt still clinging to their roots. Butter was the second hero in this story. Often homemade, churned from the cream skimmed off morning's milk, it was thick, golden, and speckled with salt. Spread generously on a thick slice of brown bread, it softened the green's edge, coating them in just enough fat to bring balance to the bite. There was no need for dressing, meat, or spice. This sandwich was about contrast, bitter and rich, crisp and soft, field and hearth. To make it, gather a small handful of young dandelion greens, preferably from a clean, chemical-free patch. Wash thoroughly and pat dry. Choose a sturdy bread with a dense crumb, like oat, rye, or whole wheat. Spread each slice with a generous helping of salted butter. Layer the dandelion leaves evenly, letting a few edges peek out from the bread. Season with a pinch of salt or a splash of cider vinegar if the greens are particularly sharp. Press the slices together gently. The result is grassy, rich, and undeniably honest. It tastes like the first thaw, like the muddy boots of spring, and the optimism that grows wild in forgotten corners. This sandwich didn't come from a recipe, it came from a walk, a habit, and the kind of hunger that taught you to see food where others saw weeds. Cold cornbread and black-eyed peas, smash-wich. This sandwich was thick with tradition and heavier than it looked, meant to be carried in a tin lunch pail, wrapped in wax paper, and eaten with dusty hands under a shade tree. The cold cornbread and black-eyed peas smash-wich didn't care for frills or freshness. It cared about function. It came from cast-iron pots, hand-sifted meal, and the deep Southern belief that good food didn't need to be hot to be good. Black-eyed peas, soaked overnight and simmered low with onion, garlic, and a scrap of smoked meat, were a staple on farms where meat was scarce and legumes were dependable. Once soft, the peas were mashed with a fork or spoon, just enough to break them down into a rough, creamy spread. Lard or bacon grease added body, salt brought flavor, and pepper gave it a kick. There was nothing fancy about it, but it stuck to your ribs. Cornbread, dense, slightly crumbly, baked in a skillet until the edges crisped, was the perfect partner. Not the sweet cake-like kind found in modern boxed mixes, but the real thing. Gritty, golden, and just dry enough to hold together when layered with bean mash. Left over from dinner, it hardened a bit overnight, making it ideal for slicing and stacking. To assemble the sandwich, cut 2 generous slabs of cold cornbread. Spread a thick layer of mashed black-eyed peas on one piece, smoothing it to the edges. If you had it, a slice of onion, a few pickled peppers, or a dab of hot sauce could be added for extra bite. Top with the second slice of cornbread, press lightly, and wrap it up. The result is earthy, savory, and satisfying. It's the kind of sandwich that makes you chew slow, not because it's fancy, but because it reminds you that good food takes time and deserves a moment. It may not be pretty, but it tastes like hard work, smart kitchens, and the kind of economy that makes something out of everything. This sandwich didn't come from a store. It came from a memory, a mess of peas, and a skillet that never cooled. Sorghum and snow apple sandwich. This was the kind of sandwich that tasted like an October morning, cool, crisp, and kissed with sweetness. The sorghum and snow apple sandwich was a fall favorite in orchard country, made when apples were at their peak and sorghum syrup ran thick from the mill. It wasn't hearty in the usual sense, but it had its own quiet power, a burst of sugar and acid tucked into slices of soft bread that kept you moving through the afternoon. Snow apples, also called famuse, were an old variety, small, round, with crimson-streaked skin and white flesh that sometimes blushed pink near the core. Their flavor was sweet, slightly floral, and more delicate than today's supermarket apples. They didn't store well, so they were eaten fresh, often straight from the tree, or sliced thin for sandwiches and pies during the brief window they were ripe. Sorghum syrup, on the other hand, was the taste of late summer's labor. Pressed from green cane and boiled down into a dark, earthy sweetness, it was thicker than honey and richer than molasses, without the bitterness. Every Southern pantry had a jar. It was poured over biscuits, stirred into beans, or, in this case, drizzled over apple slices to make something greater than the sum of its parts. To make the sandwich, slice a snow apple or another heirloom variety, wine sap or Arkansas black also work, into thin, even rounds. Lay the slices across one piece of soft white or whole wheat bread. Drizzle with a thin stream of sorghum syrup, just enough to shine on the surface but not soak the bread. Some folks added a pat of butter under the apples for extra richness, or a sprinkle of cinnamon if they were feeling festive. Top with a second slice of bread and press gently. Each bite is crisp, sticky, and just sweet enough to feel indulgent. It's not filling in the way of meat or beans, but it satisfies all the same. It tastes like orchard air, the hum of bees, and the syrupy slow of autumn days. This was a sandwich you made when the apples were fresh and the cane was pressed because neither stayed long. Goose grease and scallion smearwich. This was a sandwich that didn't care what you thought. It was rich, unapologetically fatty, and steeped in the kind of old-world thrift that knew better than to waste even a spoonful of flavor. The goose grease and scallion smearwich came from immigrant kitchens, German, Polish, Russian, where geese were raised not just for meat but for their golden fat, rendered with care and used like a sacred ingredient. Goose grease, or schmaltz as some called it, was the butter of Eastern Europe. Stored in jars in the icebox or cool cellar, it stayed soft and spreadable, shimmering with flavor. It tasted of roast dinners, of slow Sundays, of everything that came from a well-used oven. It carried the scent of roasted skin, garlic, and onions. Thick and deep, like edible memory. On bread, it was spread thick and cold, straight from the jar. Not melted, not dressed up, just scooped and smeared. Over top went finely chopped scallions, or spring onions, green tops and all. The freshness of the scallions cut through the richness of the fat, adding bite, brightness, and just enough heat to keep the palate curious. Salt was optional. Goose grease had plenty already. But pepper was common, and a few even added caraway seeds or chopped dill to echo the flavors of their heritage. To make one, take 2 slices of dark rye or coarse peasant bread, nothing soft or fluffy. This sandwich needed something hearty to hold its weight. Spread a thick layer of goose grease on each slice. Sprinkle on a handful of chopped scallions, pressing them gently into the fat so they stayed put. Top with the second slice and press together. It was best served cold, wrapped in wax paper, carried to the fields or eaten in the kitchen with a glass of buttermilk. It was quiet in its own way, no sharp crunch or splashy sweetness, just smooth, savory heft with a green snap in every bite. This sandwich didn't aim to please everyone, but for those who knew it, it was a taste of home, of old ways, and of the richness that comes from using every last drop. Cucumber and vinegar loafwich. This was a sandwich for hot days when the sun hung heavy in the sky and the thought of turning on the stove felt like a chore too far. The cucumber and vinegar loafwich was cool, crisp, and refreshingly simple. A porch swing sandwich, best enjoyed with bare feet and a glass of cold tea nearby. It came from gardens that overflowed with cucumbers and pantries stocked with vinegar, 2 things that seemed to multiply endlessly in the dog days of summer. The cucumbers were sliced thin, paper thin if you had the knife skills or a mandolin, thicker if you were in a hurry. They were tossed in a simple mixture of vinegar, water, sugar, salt, and black pepper, sometimes with a sliver of onion or a sprig of dill. After a short soak, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, they softened just enough to lose their sting, but kept a welcome crunch. The vinegar brought tang, the sugar softened the edges, and the pepper added a flicker of heat. This wasn't a pickled sandwich, not quite, but it was close. It was fresh, fast, and frugal. On a hot southern day, it was a saving grace. On a tired evening, it was dinner. And when the cucumbers kept coming, it was the sandwich you returned to again and again. To make it, start with 2 slices of soft white sandwich bread, or a light homemade loaf. Something gentle enough to yield but sturdy enough not to fall apart. Lay the drained cucumber slices across one slice, overlapping them slightly. Let the edges spill out a little. No need for neatness here. Add a few drops of the vinegar brine for extra flavor if you're feeling bold. Some folks added a smear of mayonnaise, but many preferred it plain. Top with the second slice and press lightly. Wrap it in wax paper and let it rest for a few minutes if you can. The flavors settle in, the bread softens slightly, and what seems plain turns into something quietly perfect. It's crisp, clean, and sharp in all the right places. A cooling reminder that the best meals often come straight from the garden. Corn relish and cold roast sandwich. This sandwich was a Monday miracle made from Sunday's bounty. The corn relish and cold roast sandwich brought together the richness of leftover meat with the bright tang of summer's preserved harvest. It was a familiar sight in farmhouse kitchens, quiet, colorful, and packed with flavor that only deepens after a day of rest. The cold roast, usually pork or beef, was sliced thin and served cold. It could be the heel of a Sunday roast or a few thick slices saved back from the dinner platter. Chilled, the meat firmed up and took on a new texture, chewy, savory, and perfect for layering between slices of hearty bread. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling. The kind of meat that still carried the scent of the stove and the memory of a well-set table. Corn relish, on the other hand, was bright, sweet, and tangy. It came from jars lined up in tidy rows on the pantry shelf, each one a little time capsule of late summer. Made with fresh corn kernels, bell peppers, onions, celery seed, mustard seed, and a vinegar sugar brine, it was spooned over beans, fried meats, and, most often, sandwiches like this one. Its crunch cut through the roast, and its vinegar kick lifted every bite. To build it, take 2 slices of crusty white or whole wheat bread, soft enough to bite through but firm enough to hold the moisture. Lay the sliced roast across one slice in an even layer. Spoon on a generous helping of corn relish, spreading it to the edges. A few added drops of brine could be mixed in for extra zing. Some folks might have added a smear of mustard or even a slice of cheese, but most kept it to the essentials: meat, relish, bread. Top with the second slice and press gently. The juices from the relish soak into the bread, and the cold meat anchors the whole affair with substance. It's a sandwich that hums with contrast: sweet and savory, firm and crisp, hot memory and cold practicality. It doesn't try to be more than it is, and that's exactly what makes it worth remembering. Rhubarb sauce and ham sandwich. This sandwich came with a bit of surprise. It wasn't the usual pairing of salty and sweet, but it worked, and it stuck. The rhubarb sauce and ham sandwich was a springtime staple in farm kitchens, where the rhubarb poked its crimson stalks out of the garden long before most things dared. It was sharp, pink, and just sweet enough to tame a slice of salty, smoky ham. Rhubarb sauce was one of those magical transformations. Take something stringy, sour, and almost inedible raw, then simmer it gently with sugar and a splash of water, and you end up with a soft, tangy spread that dances on the tongue. Sometimes a touch of ginger, lemon peel, or even clove was added to round out the flavor, but more often it was plain and puckery, the taste of spring in a jar. The ham, on the other hand, was sturdy and sure, often sliced from a cured or smoked joint left over from Easter or a Sunday roast. It was savory, slightly sweet, and rich with the flavor of hickory or salt. Eaten cold, it sliced clean and held its own against the bright acidity of the rhubarb. To make the sandwich, start with 2 slices of sturdy oat, rye, or wheat bread, something that can stand up to moisture without going limp. Lay down a generous smear of rhubarb sauce on one side, spreading it edge to edge. Place thin slices of cold ham on top, overlapping slightly. The ham should be firm and flavorful, not too thick. Add a second swipe of sauce on the top slice of bread if you like extra tang. Close the sandwich and press gently. Let it sit a few minutes if you can. The flavors settle in and soften the bread just enough. The result is a bright, savory, lightly sweet mouthful that surprises you with how well it works. It's not a sandwich that shouts. It just shows up, tastes like the garden, and the smokehouse shook hands and leaves you wondering why we ever stopped making things this way. Bacon and cold bean mash sandwich. This sandwich was a lesson in simplicity and satisfaction. The bacon and cold bean mash sandwich was born from 2 of the most reliable kitchen staples on the farm: a pot of beans and a skillet of bacon. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. It was straightforward, salty, and hearty. The kind of meal that carried you through a long morning without making a fuss. Pinto beans were the usual choice, slow cooked until soft, often with onion, garlic, and whatever scrap of ham or salt pork was on hand. They simmered on the back of the stove all day, soaking up flavor and thickening into something sturdy. Come morning, what was left in the pot was mashed with a fork, just enough to turn it into a thick, spreadable paste. Some added a touch of lard or bacon grease to loosen it. Others left it chunky and rustic. Then came the bacon. Fried until crisp and crumbled or laid in full strips, it brought crunch and smoke, the kind of sharp flavor that made the beans taste even deeper. A little bacon went a long way, and that was the whole point. You didn't need much to make it special. To build the sandwich, take 2 slices of hearty white or whole wheat bread, something plain, something reliable. Spread a generous layer of the cold bean mash on one slice. Lay a few strips of bacon over the top, or scatter crumbles evenly if you prefer a softer bite. A sprinkle of black pepper or a splash of vinegar added a nice touch, but most folks kept it clean. Top with the second slice, press gently and wrap it tight. It was good cold, even better when the bread had soaked in some of the bacon fat, and best of all when eaten with your boots off and your feet up. It was the kind of sandwich that didn't need heat to be comforting, didn't need garnish to be good. Just beans, bacon, and bread. 3 things that showed up time and again in kitchens that knew how to make a little stretch a long way. Souse meat and mustard sandwich. This was the kind of sandwich that divided a table. Either you loved it or you politely passed. The Souse meat and mustard sandwich wasn't made to charm everyone. It was bold, tangy, and just a little strange to the uninitiated. But for folks who grew up with it, it was a familiar comfort. A slice of resourceful cooking wrapped in rye bread and nostalgia. Souse, also known as head cheese or hog's head terrine, was one of the ultimate expressions of waste not wisdom. Made from slow-simmered pork scraps, head, tongue, sometimes feet, it was chopped fine and suspended in a seasoned gelatin made from its own cooking broth. Vinegar was the key. It gave the souse its bracing, pickled bite and made it a natural partner for sharp yellow mustard. Once cooled and set into loaves, souse could be sliced thin, like deli meat, and laid onto bread with a firmness that belied its gelatinous nature. The flavor was savory, porky, and bright with vinegar, far more complex than its modest ingredients might suggest. It was common in southern kitchens, especially among older generations who remembered the hog butchering days, where every part of the animal had a purpose and a recipe. To make the sandwich, take 2 slices of dark rye or a soft sandwich bread, something with character. Lay down a few slices of cold souse meat, about 1/4 inch thick. Spread a hearty layer of yellow mustard on the opposite slice of bread, enough to coat the mouth and counter the tang of the meat. Add sliced onion or pickles if you like a little crunch, though the traditionalists usually kept it simple. Close the sandwich, press it together gently, and let it rest a minute so the mustard and vinegar can mingle. The result is sharp, savory, and distinctly old-fashioned. It's a sandwich with opinions, firm, flavorful, and not for fence-sitters. But for those who crave bold, brined, and handmade flavors, it's a bite of tradition that's hard to forget. Cold sausage and cabbage sandwich. This sandwich was a second-day triumph, a way to turn yesterday's skillet into today's lunchbox. The cold sausage and cabbage sandwich was a staple in homes where dinner was never just for dinner. It was a reflection of efficiency, flavor, and the beauty of leftovers. The kind of sandwich you could pack in wax paper and eat cold while sitting on the tailgate or crouched under a tree at the edge of a field. The sausage was usually homemade or from a trusted butcher, seasoned with sage, garlic, and black pepper, and browned to a deep, fragrant crisp in a cast iron skillet. After supper, the leftovers were saved, cooling overnight until they firmed up enough to slice clean. Eaten cold, the sausage held onto its flavor and gained a satisfying chew. The cabbage came alongside. Wilted down in the sausage drippings, often with onions or a splash of vinegar, it turned sweet and tender with just enough tang to stand up to the richness of the meat. Like the sausage, it was better the next day. Its flavors mellowed, its texture more yielding. To build the sandwich, take 2 slices of rye pumpernickel or a good hearty wheat bread, something strong enough to hold moisture without falling apart. Lay down a few slices of cold sausage, then spoon on the cooled cabbage mixture, spreading it evenly. Some folks added a dab of mustard or a slice of cheese, but more often it was kept plain, just sausage, cabbage, and bread. Press the sandwich together and let it rest. The bread softens slightly against the cabbage, and the whole thing settles into a compact, flavor-packed meal. It was best eaten cold, with nothing more than a cloth napkin and maybe a cold drink nearby. This sandwich wasn't elegant. It was practical. And that's what made it so good. It came from kitchens that didn't waste and knew that flavor often improved overnight. It was proof that good food doesn't have to be fancy, just well-seasoned, well-used, and remembered. Molasses-braised onion sandwich. This was a sandwich that started in a skillet and lingered in your memory. The molasses-braised onion sandwich was born from slow cooking, cheap ingredients, and the belief that anything, given enough time and attention, could become something deeply satisfying. It was dark, sticky, sweet, and savory all at once, the kind of flavor you didn't expect from onions and syrup alone. The onions were sliced thick, yellow or white, preferably from the garden or root cellar. Tossed into a skillet with a bit of bacon grease or butter, they were left to cook, slow and low, turning soft and golden, then rich and caramelized. Just when they hit that perfect point between tender and crisped, a spoonful of blackstrap molasses was added to the pan. The syrup melted into the onions, coating them in a glossy glaze that deepened their sweetness and added a faint bitterness, like burnt sugar at the edge of a campfire. The result was something more than fried onions. This was almost a jam, thick and dark, with a flavor that curled around the tongue and stuck with you. To make the sandwich, you needed a sturdy bread, coarse rye, oat, or a thick slice of homemade whole wheat. Soft bread wouldn't hold up to the filling, and the crust gave just enough resistance to make each bite feel earned. A generous pile of the warm onions was spooned onto the bread, spread edge to edge like preserves. Some folks left it at that. Others added a sliver of cheese or slice of cold meat if they had it, but the classic version didn't need it. Top with a second slice of bread, press gently, and let the heat of the onions soak in. Eaten warm, it was comforting and rich. Eaten cold the next day, it was mellow, a little chewy, and still delicious. This sandwich was proof that depth of flavor didn't require a long ingredient list. Just a little thyme, a bit of fat, and a spoonful of molasses. It was the taste of a slow-cooked philosophy, one that turned the simplest things into something worth remembering. Scrapple sandwich. This sandwich came sizzling out of a skillet and landed between slices of bread with the kind of confidence only generations of tradition can carry. The Scrapple sandwich was born in the mid-Atlantic, particularly Pennsylvania Dutch country, where thrift wasn't just practical, it was sacred. Scrapple itself was a masterpiece of resourcefulness, and once fried golden and crisp, it made a sandwich that was crisp on the outside, soft in the middle, and rich in every bite. Scrapple starts where most folks stop, with the scraps. Pork liver, heart, and bits from the head were simmered into a rich broth, then strained and mixed with cornmeal, buckwheat flour, and spices like sage and black pepper. The mixture was cooked until thick, poured into loaf pans, and chilled until it could be sliced. What emerged was a dense, gray-brown block of flavor ready for the frying pan. In the morning, slices of scrapple, usually about half an inch thick, were dropped into a hot skillet with just enough grease to crisp the edges. The goal was contrast, a golden brown crust on the outside and a tender, almost creamy center inside. Once fried, it slid easily into a biscuit or between slices of bread. Some kept it simple, just scrapple on white or wheat bread, maybe a smear of butter. Others dressed it up with mustard, apple butter, or even ketchup. The sweet-savory balance was a favorite, especially with the spiced depth of the scrapple. To build it, start with 2 slices of bread, soft enough to yield, sturdy enough to hold the heat. Fry a slice or 2 of scrapple until crisp and golden on both sides. Lay it on the bread. Add condiments if you like, mustard for tang, apple butter for sweetness, or a fried egg for extra richness. Top with the second slice and press lightly. This sandwich doesn't beg for attention, but it earns respect. It's filling, flavorful, and born from the kind of cooking that sees potential in every scrap. A bite of scrapple is a bite of history, resourceful, seasoned, and surprisingly refined. Liver pudding and pickled okra sandwich. This sandwich had attitude, southern, salty, and proudly unrefined. The liver pudding and pickled okra sandwich was a regional favorite in North Carolina, Georgia, and beyond. Where the breakfast table stretched into lunch and where liver wasn't avoided, it was celebrated. It was creamy, spicy, tangy, and bold. Everything you might not expect between 2 slices of bread, but everything you needed to cut through a hard day. Liver pudding, also known as liver mush in some parts, was a soft, savory loaf made from pork liver, head meat, cornmeal, and spices. It was molded into blocks, sliced, and either eaten cold or, more often, pan-fried until crisp at the edges and soft in the middle. The flavor was deep, earthy and peppery with a hint of sage and onion. It wasn't for everyone, but those who grew up on it wouldn't trade it for prime rib. Pickled okra came in tall jars, packed tight with garlic, vinegar, and just enough chili to tingle the tongue. Crunchy, tangy, and a little slippery, okra added the bright, acidic punch that liver pudding didn't know it needed. Together, they formed a pairing that made perfect sense once you tasted it. To build the sandwich, fry slices of liver pudding in a hot skillet until the outside browns and crisps, but the center stays tender. Let them rest on a paper towel. Take 2 slices of white bread, soft and classic, or use a biscuit for a more traditional Southern approach. Lay the liver pudding on one side. Slice the pickled okra lengthwise and layer it across the meat, pressing it in gently. A dab of mustard or hot sauce was common in some kitchens, but purists stuck to just the basics: pudding, okra, and bread. The result is a sandwich of contrast, smooth and crunchy, rich and vinegary, deeply Southern and surprisingly bright. It tastes like the breakfast table on a hot July morning, like cast iron and canning jars, like something you only find when you don't forget where you came from. Bologna and Chow sandwich. This sandwich came wrapped in wax paper and pride, the kind you'd find stuffed into a tin lunchbox or passed across the table at a church picnic. The Bologna and Chow sandwich was a Southern classic, cheap, cheerful, and bursting with flavor. It didn't need a recipe or a reason. It was made from what was in the fridge and what was in the pantry, and it always delivered. Bologna was the everyday meat. Thick cut from the deli or thin sliced from a plastic pack, it didn't matter. Some fried it until the edges curled like little bowls, others laid it down cold and floppy. It had a bouncy bite, a salty richness, and a fat slicked surface that practically begged for something sharp to balance it. Enter Chow, a chunky vinegary relish made from green tomatoes, cabbage, peppers, onions, and just enough sugar and mustard seed to give it depth. Canned by the quart during the fall canning rush, Chow was sweet, spicy, sour, and crunchy all at once. It turned plain beans into a side dish, hot dogs into a meal, and bologna into something you didn't just settle for, you looked forward to. To make the sandwich, start with 2 slices of soft white bread or a sturdy sandwich loaf. Fry the bologna if you want a little char, or use it cold for a softer bite. Lay down a slice or 2. Spoon on a generous helping of Chow. Don't be shy. Let the juices soak into the bread a little. Some folks added a swipe of mayonnaise or mustard, but many let the Chow do all the talking. Top with the second slice, press gently, and let it rest just long enough for the flavors to settle. This sandwich was joyfully unpretentious. It had zip, crunch, and that unmistakable bologna chew. It reminded you that a humble lunch didn't mean a dull one. In fact, with the right relish, it could be downright exciting. It wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to satisfy. And it did, every single time. Cold sweet tater sandwich. This was summer in a sandwich. If summer were sun-warmed tomatoes and the unmistakable scent of bacon that lingered in a kitchen long after breakfast. The tomato and bacon grease breadwich was simple and glorious, a celebration of the garden and the skillet. It was made quickly, eaten slowly, and remembered long after the last bite. At the heart of it was the tomato, big, red, and ripe to the point of bursting. Not those pale supermarket imitations, but the real thing. Brandy wines, Cherokee purples, or beefsteaks. Grown in backyard plots or borrowed from a neighbor's vine. When sliced, they dripped with juice and seed, their flesh soft and sun-sweet, their scent earthy and alive. Then came the bacon grease, what was left in the skillet after breakfast, poured off into a coffee can or mason jar and kept near the stove like a well-used secret. It was smoky, salty, and slick with flavor. A thin spread of it on bread was enough to bring life to the plainest sandwich, and when paired with a tomato in its prime, it became something sacred. To build the sandwich, take 2 slices of white sandwich bread. Soft, pillowy, and ready to soak up everything. While the bread is still warm, or gently toasted if you like, spread a thin layer of bacon grease across each slice. Lay down thick slices of tomato, overlapping slightly, letting the juice run into the bread. Sprinkle with salt, coarse if you have it, and a heavy grind of black pepper. Some added a leaf of fresh basil or a whisper of onion, but the purists let the tomato and grease speak for themselves. Top with the second slice, press it down gently, and give it a moment. The bacon fat melts into the tomato, the bread drinks up the juices, and the whole sandwich becomes more than the sum of its humble parts. It was never fancy, but always rich. The kind of sandwich you ate standing over the sink, licking your fingers and wondering why anyone ever needed anything more. Butter and radish sandwich. This was a sandwich with old country roots, European at heart, but right at home in American farm kitchens. The butter and radish sandwich was crisp, creamy, and quietly elegant in a way only the simplest dishes can be. It was the kind of thing made when spring first cracked the soil open, and the radishes came up bold, pink, and peppery. Radishes, freshly pulled, carried a kind of clean heat, sharp on the tongue but softened by their juicy crunch. They were one of the first vegetables ready in the garden, a hopeful sign of the harvest to come. Sliced thin, their red skins made a beautiful ringed pattern against their white centers like little edible fireworks laid out on a plate. The butter had to be good, real butter, cold but spreadable, salted just enough to contrast the spice of the radish. In some homes, it was churned by hand. In others, bought from the creamery in golden bricks. Either way, it was spread thick on crusty bread, where it began to soften immediately, soaking into the crumb and holding each radish slice in place like glue. To make the sandwich, slice a baguette, a rustic rye, or a hearty wheat loaf. Spread each slice with a generous layer of butter. Don't skimp. The butter is half the sandwich. Layer thin radish slices across the bread, slightly overlapping. Sprinkle with a pinch of sea salt or cracked black pepper if you want a little extra lift. Some added a squeeze of lemon juice or a few sprigs of dill or parsley for color, but it was never necessary. Close the sandwich or eat it open-faced. It worked both ways. It was best eaten fresh, when the butter was cool and the radishes still snapped. The result was crisp, cool, and rich, with a perfect balance of creamy fat and vegetable heat. This was not a meal for show. It was for satisfaction, for using what the garden gave and letting it shine. A sandwich that tasted like dirt under your nails, butter on your breath, and the first green days of a long-awaited spring. Buttermilk cheese and tomato sandwich. Long before cream cheese came in silver foil packs and plastic tubs, there was buttermilk cheese, homemade, humble, and spooned into cloth to drain on the windowsill. The buttermilk cheese and tomato sandwich was a summertime treasure, built when the tomatoes were heavy on the vine and the milk was still warm from morning milking. It was simple, cool, and a quiet reminder of how little you needed when everything was fresh. Buttermilk cheese, also called clabber cheese or farmer's cheese in some regions, was made by letting fresh buttermilk curdle naturally, then straining it through cheesecloth until it formed soft, spreadable curds. Slightly tangy, creamy, and mild, it tasted like a cross between ricotta and yogurt, a blank slate with just enough personality to carry a sandwich. It paired perfectly with ripe tomatoes, sliced thick and still warm from the sun, their juice mingling with the cheese to create a bite that was equal parts richness and refreshment. In hot weather, this sandwich was a lunchbox miracle, cool, nourishing, and no stove required. Some folks sprinkled on a little salt and pepper. Others added chopped chives or a few basil leaves, but at its heart, it was always about the cheese and the tomato, pressed between slices of soft bread and eaten with both hands. To make it, start with a fresh batch of buttermilk cheese, or substitute with a quality farmer's cheese or drained yogurt cheese if you're short on time. Slice a garden tomato into thick rounds. Spread the cheese generously on both slices of bread, white, brown, or even a coarse rye if that's what's around. Lay the tomato slices on top, overlapping slightly. Season with salt and pepper. Close it up and press gently. The cheese softens, the tomato soaks in, and suddenly you've got summer between two slices. Lye-cured ham and cold grit cake sandwich. This sandwich carried the deep smoky echo of the smokehouse and the quiet heft of a cast iron pot. The lye-cured ham and cold grit cake sandwich was born in the South, where preservation was both art and necessity, and where yesterday's breakfast was never too proud to show up again at lunch. Lye-cured ham aged and smoked until it could be sliced paper thin or hacked off in chunks, was salty, bold, and as close to jerky as meat could get while still being tender. It was often too intense to eat alone, but paired with something soft and starchy like a grit cake, it mellowed into pure harmony. Grit cakes were simple. Leftover grits poured into a greased dish, left to set overnight, then sliced and fried until golden brown on the outside and creamy in the center. When cold, the grit cakes firmed up just enough to work as a sandwich base, sort of like a cornbread patty with a little more chew. Layered with slices of cured ham, the result was salty, savory, and surprisingly portable. It stuck with you, especially when wrapped in wax paper and tucked in with a cold jar of tea. To make one, cook up a pot of stone-ground grits, seasoned well with salt and maybe a bit of butter. Pour into a shallow dish and let it chill overnight. Cut into slabs and pan fry in lard or oil until both sides are browned and crisp. Let cool. Take a slice of cold ham, preferably dry-cured and thin-sliced, and layer it between 2 grit cakes. Press gently. You won't find this one in any deli case. It's old, salty, a little crumbly, and built for hard days. A sandwich that speaks the language of smoke and skillet with no need for frills. Crispy onion skin and bacon fat sandwich. This was a sandwich that didn't bother with pretensions. It spoke the language of waste not, want not. The crispy onion skin and bacon fat sandwich came from kitchens where no part of the onion was thrown away and where bacon grease was never discarded but carefully saved in a jar for the next meal. It was frugal, resourceful, and delightfully scrappy. And that was exactly its charm. Most people would toss the papery onion skins once they peeled the bulb, but not in this kitchen. The sharpest cooks knew that those seemingly worthless outer layers could be transformed into something remarkable. When crisped in hot bacon fat, the skins curled up, darkened, and turned into little crunchy pieces of smoky, caramelized goodness. They became the star of this simple, no-waste sandwich. Bacon fat, of course, was the secret weapon. Saved from breakfast past and kept in a jar beside the stove, it was the savory base for so many dishes. It was never discarded, but treated like liquid gold. When drizzled onto soft bread, it softened the crusts just enough while still holding onto that rich, meaty depth. It didn't take much. A light drizzle over the bread was enough to add flavor, moisture, and just a touch of indulgence to the humble sandwich. Once the onion skins were crisped in the bacon fat, they were layered onto the bread, each piece crackling with that smoky, almost toasty flavor. The texture was a study in contrasts. Soft, greasy bread against the sharp, brittle crunch of the onion skins. Every bite was full of crunch, richness, and just enough bite to remind you that sometimes the best things come from what's left behind. This sandwich wasn't meant for impressing guests. It was often eaten in quiet moments, maybe after the real meal was done, standing over the sink or sitting at the kitchen table. Sometimes it was wrapped in wax paper and tucked into a farmer's lunch pail for a quick bite in the barn. But for those who grew up with it, it was a secret pleasure, a reminder that there was beauty in the things others overlooked. To make it, save the dry, clean outer layers of yellow or white onions. Heat a few tablespoons of bacon fat in a skillet until shimmering. Toss in the skins and fry them for just a minute or two until they turn golden and crisp without burning. Remove them with tongs and set them aside to drain on a towel. Then, take 2 slices of soft bread, white or wheat, and drizzle lightly with warm bacon fat. Layer the crispy onion skins between the slices and press gently. It's sharp, savory, and whisper thin. A sandwich built from almost nothing, but unforgettable all the same. Stewed tomato and egg sandwich. There's something quietly elegant about this sandwich, even though it comes from the humblest of kitchens. The stewed tomato and egg sandwich was born from the kind of resourcefulness that arose when fresh meat was scarce, but there was always something to be had in the garden. It was often made on days when the chickens were still laying, and last summer's jars of tomatoes lined the cellar shelves, waiting to be used in the simplest of ways. The tomatoes were the first to get attention. Slowly simmered in a pot, they were stewed down with a handful of finely chopped onion, a dash of salt, and a pinch of sugar to balance the natural acidity. If the season allowed, a knob of butter was thrown in, adding richness. The mixture was stirred until it thickened just enough to coat the back of a spoon, the deep, tangy aroma of tomatoes, filling the kitchen with the promise of warmth. The smell alone was enough to quiet a room. It was simple comfort in the making. Then came the eggs. Cracked right into the bubbling tomato sauce, they were stirred gently, their golden yolks breaking open and swirling into the sauce, becoming part of it. The eggs scrambled softly in the pan, absorbing the richness of the tomatoes, turning the mixture into a creamy, saucy delight. It was almost like a rustic shakshuka long before that name became fashionable. Eggs and tomatoes coming together in a way that was so satisfying, so homey, that it made you forget you were missing anything else. Once the tomato and egg mixture was ready, it was spooned generously onto slices of fresh or toasted bread. The bread soaked up the sauce, softening and becoming part of the filling, but it still held its form, creating a sturdy base for the rich, flavorful topping. Some folks added a sprinkle of red pepper flakes for heat, or a clove of garlic for depth, but most kept it simple and let the eggs and tomatoes do the talking. To finish, close the sandwich with another slice of bread and let it rest a moment so the juices can settle in. It's warm, soft, and full of the comforting flavors that only slow-simmered tomatoes and fresh eggs can deliver. This sandwich doesn't need to impress anyone. It's quietly satisfying and wholly nourishing, proof that even the simplest ingredients, when handled with care, can become something truly special. Gizzard Gravy Biscuit Sandwich. If you've ever stood near a stove on a Sunday afternoon and smelled something simmering that made you close your eyes and smile, then you already know the soul of this sandwich. The Gizzard Gravy Biscuit Sandwich wasn't built for looks. It was built for substance. This was food that knew where it came from. It made the most of the overlooked, the unwanted, and it turned them into a meal worth remembering. Chicken gizzards, along with hearts, necks, and other giblets, were often thrown in free when you bought a bird tucked in butcher paper or stuffed into the cavity like an afterthought. But in farmhouse kitchens, those bits weren't scraps. They were the beginnings of something great. Gizzards were simmered first, slow and steady in seasoned water until tender. Then they were chopped fine and dropped into hot bacon grease or drippings in a cast iron skillet, where they sizzled and browned, releasing their deep, meaty scent into the room. Once browned, a scoop of flour was added, stirred until nutty and golden. Milk or broth, whatever was handy, was poured in slowly, whisked into the roux until the gravy thickened into a speckled, peppery, gizzard-rich stew. This wasn't smooth or refined. It had chew. It had depth. It tasted like time, like effort, like every good bite of supper that ever came out of a farmhouse kitchen. Biscuits were baked while the gravy simmered, fluffy, golden-topped, and hot from the oven. Split open on a plate, steam rolled up like a promise. The bottom half caught the first ladle of gravy, maybe an extra spoonful for good measure, and then the top was set on gently, softening at the edges but still standing proud. To make one, simmer the gizzards till tender. Chop them fine, brown and fat. Add flour. Then whisk in milk or broth. Season generously with salt, black pepper, and a dash of sage if you've got it. Cook until thick. Ladle onto a fresh biscuit and serve. It's humble. It's hearty. And it's proof that what others overlook can be turned into something rich, honest, and deeply satisfying. That's the thing about sandwiches like these. They weren't trying to impress anybody. They weren't made to be photographed, marketed, or fussed over. They were made in quiet kitchens, with tired hands and full hearts, using whatever was left in the pot or the garden or the smokehouse. And somehow, through all that thrift and necessity, they became something more. They became memory. Each one of these 30 sandwiches tells a story of a place, a season, a scrap of meat, or a spoonful of gravy stretched across a day's labor. They speak of communities where nothing was wasted, not food, not time, not effort, where a smear of apple butter on cottage cheese or a bite of cold bean mash on cornbread wasn't just lunch. It was resourcefulness. It was pride. It was home. Some of these sandwiches may seem strange now: pickled okra on liver pudding, onion skins fried crisp in bacon fat. But if you listen closely, you can hear the rhythm behind them. You can taste the habits of people who knew how to live well without having much. People who cooked without recipes, who seasoned with memory, and learned with every meal how to stretch, save, and savor. Most of these sandwiches are gone from the mainstream now, replaced by wrapped deli melts and meal deals. Forgotten, maybe, but not lost. Because as long as someone remembers, as long as someone cooks, they can live again. In your kitchen, on your table, in your hands. So maybe tomorrow, or next week, or next time you've got cold grits or a spoonful of chow chow left in the jar, you'll remember one of these old farmer sandwiches. And maybe you'll try it, not for nostalgia's sake, but because it tastes good, because it's real, because it came from people who knew how to make something out of nearly nothing and how to make it well. Here's to them. And here's to what we remember every time we make a sandwich that matters.